Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's most definitive all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, hanging out in Brooklyn and driving a broomstick through the air and kissing the devil's cock. So I'm just curious. I'm not alone, so don't fret, listeners. I'm not alone, but I do want to know, are there any blasphemers who are joining me here today?
Me, I'm a blasphemer. It's Steve Guntley. And Jared, listen, we've got our whole lives to podcast, but the bread is burning now. So we must address that first before we get started with anything. This is the podcast. It's all about corpse pinatas, fingering stigmata, and of course, flogging the bishop. Because this week we are talking about Stuart Gordon's The PIT and the Pendulum, a first-time watch for me, a movie I'm very excited to talk about. And I'm also very excited because we have a special guest joining us to help dissect this absolutely mad movie. A really fantastically entertaining film.
We sure do. We have a very special guest with us today. You've probably, if you're a horror fan, you've probably read some of his criticisms. If you're just a movie fan in general, I'm sure you've seen his name connected to something that you've read about a movie that you saw or wanted to see. He's also a wonderful podcaster who was a part of the duo of 80s All Over, which was an amazing podcast, but right now hosts a fantastic show called Overhated. I'm talking, of course, about Scott Weinberg. Scott, how are you? Thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you for that lovely intro, and you are very welcome. This is a topic that I love 80s and 90s horror, and I love tackling stuff by like category, and a production company is a fun category. So I salute your mandate for this wacky podcast, and I am flattered and very pleased to be a part of an episode.
We're really excited to have you,
Scott.
Sure.
It's funny. You're the first person between myself, Steve, or any guests who have referred to our mission statement as a mandate. And I think that's accurate when you look at the daunting task
just love
that's ahead of us.
I prefer mission from God.
Podcasts, maybe not infancy, but are still in their toddler state. And you look around and you see like, I've done 3 podcasts and they're all topics. One called Science versus Fiction, where we jocular in a tongue-in-cheek fashion discuss science in fiction, and with an astrophysicist who's my writing partner, Stephen. And so like I love looking around and seeing like, I listened to a great podcast called Too Scary Didn't Watch. It's 3 women.
I love that show.
Is that a great show?
Great show.
Yeah.
We all love How Did This Get Made and the Flophouse and all that. Like, but there are so many, and you start to see the niche ones. You start to see like Nathan Rabin did the one with Cage and Travolta. I love the niche podcasts, and Full Moon and the Charles Band universe is a great niche.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
And
we
Nathan
so
Rabin did From Beyond with us.
He's
Another
a great,
Stuart Gordon
he and I think have like similar brains. We're often on the same podcasts. We often adhere. I have to have him back on Overhated soon. He's a great movie brain and a really good guy.
Yeah,
Scott, do
absolutely.
us a favor. Can you, for our listeners who maybe haven't discovered Overhated yet, can you really briefly just describe what you do on that show? Because I love it, and I'll get into when I start to ask you a little bit more about your history with horror and Full Moon. I'll get into why, but I think this is a great concept for a podcast. What is Overhated?
Well, like I said, I love stuff like Mystery Science and Flophouse and We Hate Movies. I love when overblown or inept movies are poked fun at a little bit. Riff Tracks, that's another one, of course. I don't like it when anybody becomes like malicious and nasty towards filmmakers, but I love movies and I can make fun of them, even ones that I like. So I'm a big fan of people who approach film analysis with that kind of like irreverent approach. But I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do the opposite? Instead of saying, hey, you know what's bad? Wild Wild West. Wouldn't it be fun for me to find somebody out there who really sincerely likes it for a handful of reasons? And then you could have me offer my honest opinion, and I'm pretty kind to quote unquote bad movies to begin with. Wild Wild West would be a good episode because I don't like that. That's just straight up bad. But I've had recent episodes, Poltergeist 3, Battle Los Angeles, Space Jam. And the way I normally do it is that I ask the guest to come up with a movie that they are very defensive about.
Yeah.
And there are, on rare occasion, I'll go, yeah, but that was a hit, and yeah, but people really liked it. But we also done films that like died at the box office, but then have gone on to become beloved, like Dark City and no, not Dark City. We didn't cover that, but that's an example of that. And Josie and the Pussycats would be a good example of that.
A
where
movie
people,
I think is pretty damn near perfect.
Yeah, it is so funny and so clever, and it was generally dismissed even by its target audience. And then the day it hit video, it seems like people went, "Oh, wait a minute, this is a satire, and it's clever, and I like it." And since that day, Josie and the Pussycats has been like a cult favorite. People love that movie. So so that way I'll use the context of overhated in that critics and or audiences ignored it, therefore hated. And I'm stretching the concept, but it's a podcast about overhated, underrated, unfairly trashed movies.
I love that idea. It's kind of a finding something nice to say about even the lowliest failures of movies, which I love.
Ultimately, you find that people would say, "Oh, that blank was the worst movie of 1986," and the fun part of the episode is we often discover that movie wasn't even the worst movie of the month it came out, let alone year.
Scott, are you thinking of Howard the Duck in your brain right now?
Yeah, Howard the Duck. Ishtar is what I was actually thinking of.
Ishtar's had a reawakening in the last couple of years. People have finally come around to Ishtar.
And I think that's because the stuff that mainly led to its dismissal or derision was a lot of the talk about how wasteful and over budget the production was. And it was, but who cares?
It was also a female director who they do not tend to get as many at bats as male directors.
Yeah, they don't get as many breaks on an overrun movie. But now, divorced of all that negative buzz before the film came out, and then it cost a whole lot of money, and then it's like, yeah, it's kind of a funny odd couple farce, I guess, mixed with a political or action film. But you watch it now and you're like, this is what people hated. This is what people were calling the worst film ever made. Really?
It was kind of, maybe it was just because I was a Mad Magazine reader. I promise we'll get back to our movie, but maybe it's just because I was a Mad Magazine reader. Like, I always internalized Ishtar as the worst movie ever made.
Yeah.
That was their go-to punchline. Yeah.
It was a punchline for 15, 20 years, and not even. And then when Waterworld came out, he called it Fishtar.
Another great movie. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So, the only film, I've done 140 some episodes of Overhated so far, and the only film that I like, there has been plenty I've watched and or revisited that I just didn't care for. Still didn't care for, but the only movie that I like regretted and had a miserable time revisiting was Rollerball the remake.
Oh, Rollerball is rough. That is rough. I paid to see that thing in theaters. Yeah,
I could find something to love in Battlefield Earth, Catwoman, Cat in the Hat. I mean, these are movies I hate. But like Rollerball, the remake is so irretrievably bad. It's the worst film. But just based on Overhated, it's the worst film we've covered so far.
Well, this sounds amazing. Definitely.
I'm watching all of our Rollerball loving audience members just deleting the podcast from their queues right now.
And I would ask those listeners to if before they discount me and or your wonderful podcast completely, go watch the original 1975 with James Caan.
Yeah, so much more fun.
Yeah.
So Scott, I want to ask you, I know just from having read your work and listened to you on shows, you always had a love of horror and stuff like that. And rather than go back and talk about like when that started for you and stuff like that, I'm more curious now where we're tackling The Pit and the Pendulum, 1991. It's sort of right in, I guess we can call it a later period Stuart Gordon, although it's kind of right smack in the middle really of what he was
doing. It was like the beginning of his mid period. Yeah.
But when were you sort of aware of, like, were you aware of Gordon at the Empire days, or was he somebody who you discovered later and went back?
I'm almost certain, because Reanimator was what, 85?
Yes,
Yes,
85.
yeah.
All right, which means I would have been 13 and therefore scouring the weekend section every Friday for new horror films.
Hell yeah.
And I'm almost certain that it was one of those tuck it into your back pocket for 8 months from now when it hits VHS, because that looks awesome. I did not, I was able to get into a lot of R-rated movies at 13, 14, but I am almost certain I did not see Reanimator until it hit VHS. And I fell in love with it. It was like comedy and horror, and it had a real kinetic vibe to it. Not action per se, but kind of an action energy.
Mhm.
Good cast, just a complete whole. I didn't know much about Lovecraft at that point, but it just struck me as like, it's not like every slasher movie. It's not like every like bio horror. It's not a bit like any zombie movie, but it's a little bit about zombies. And this whole thing with the guy with the head on the tray, I was just blown away.
Yeah,
Absolutely. We talk a lot about that on the show, that video store experience of being kids and just wandering around the video store aisles and just filing all of that away in your memory palace and just like, oh yeah, okay, I have to make a note.
And the funny thing is,
yeah,
2 years later, I snagged From Beyond, and at 15, 16 or whatever, I think, except for maybe the visceral and sexy parts of it, went right over my head.
yeah,
Didn't give it much of a second thought. And then in my 30s or 40s, I rediscovered From Beyond, and that is as good, I think, as Reanimator.
I need to rewatch Reanimator, but it's definitely up there for me. It's
From Beyond is
yeah,
great.
absolutely.
And then I think after that he did Dolls. Was that the next
Yeah,
one?
yeah,
And
Dolls,
that's a
yeah.
hoot.
Yeah,
So real fun. It's exactly what it says on the box. Killer Dolls. And like that would, to me, wait, and then he did this is off the top of my head. Why am I doing it off the top of my head when I have the internet in front of
because
my
you're
eyes?
one of us.
I
You
know.
get it.
exactly. Like I'm
reason
here,
I
I'm
watch
doing
Jocks
it
next.
chronologically in my
Trying
head
to
too.
go
I'm
from
going,
memory. Stuart Gordon's
yeah,
filmography.
Robot Jocks, I think would be next.
Right, but then there was but Dagon wasn't until like several years.
That
Yeah,
that was
Dagon
Dagon was
2000.
2001 or 2, sometime
I
around
think-
then.
something like that.
I think in my brain I always immediately connect to his Lovecraft connection, but adaptations. But the great, wonderful Stuart Gordon, who is no longer with us, and I had the great pleasure of meeting very briefly at Fantastic Fest. Thank you, Barbara Crampton. He was such a nice guy. I mean, again, I think I spoke to him for like 10 or 15 minutes, but he knew my work, and he was just like so gracious about his, like, talking about, everything good I got from Lovecraft and my actors and my writer. It's just, he's just constant giving credit away. He was such a nice, he looked like a tough guy. He looked like somebody you wouldn't want to mess with, but he was just, from the minute he opened his mouth, you were like, oh, I like him.
Yeah, that's
he
what
always
I've heard.
struck me as, just kind of a gentleman, and that seems to be so true of so many like big horror figures, because they're exercising whatever demons they have on screen, and so when they're off screen, maybe it's because the perception of them, or maybe it's because they're just a little more
I think it's both.
well-adjusted.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think sometimes writing or making horror stories can be a bit cathartic and helps you get some of your demons or tensions out.
It's true, yeah.
And on the other hand, like you said, we think, well, if you tell scary stories, you must be intense and ominous. And then when they're not, you're like, oh, you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you notice it even more with those people.
We hear that all the time. We were talking to an actor who worked on a Friday the 13th movie with Kane Hodder, who just said that Kane Hodder was just like a big brother to everybody. He was like, he's this big hulking guy, but he's a bit teddy bear who was just sort of like watching out for everybody on set, making sure they were all like, taken care of, which, you hear that over and over about these big horror guys.
Yeah, you'll always hope that's true, because I also could, and I won't, but I could also tell stories I've heard about people on horror movies who were just outright dicks to each other.
True. Yeah.
So yeah, like the fact that Kane Hodder, he's like royalty, and by all accounts, a good guy.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Well, let's jump in and talk about The Pit and the Pendulum a little bit, because like I said, this is a Stuart Gordon movie that is new to me. So this movie came out on June 27th, 1991. It's directed by Stuart Gordon and written by Dennis Paoli, and it stars, holy shit, this cast: Lance Henriksen, Rona DeRicci, Jonathan Fuller, Jeffrey Combs, Mark Margolis, Tom Towles, Stephen Lee, Francis Bay, and the great Oliver Reed. So when we last discussed Stuart Gordon, it was with Nathan for From Beyond. We talked a little bit about his love of Roger Corman's films and how Roger Corman had kind of a stock company that he would bring back every time to make different Poe adaptations, and that's what Gordon wanted to do with his Lovecraft adaptations. It wanted to be him, Dennis Paoli, Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton in all of these different Lovecraft adaptations.
Right, he wanted to do like the kind of the Poe cycle that Corman did in the 60s.
100%. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He wanted to kind of emulate that. And so this time for 1991's Pit and the Pendulum, he didn't just pay tribute. He dove right into his own Poe adaptation. This is one of his most famous stories. It was published in 1842, set during the Spanish Inquisition. And it's a short story that focuses on a hapless victim trapped in this elaborate mechanized torture chamber.
You read the short story and you're struck by how much nonsense is in all of the adaptations.
Yes. Yeah. Because
and I don't mean nonsense in a bad way. I mean, like,
no, yeah. I mean, you need to fill it out somehow, but like this one is a really lean and kind of scary story. This was my first Poe story. I probably read it when I was like 10 or 11.
It is
really
terrifying.
It is.
If
It's
you
still
like imagine reading this when it came out, and it's like a man who's like throwing his hands around the dark in a torture chamber, trying to figure out where he is. And now his hands go over this hole. It's a pit. He doesn't know how wide or how far down it goes. I mean, and it's like this first person horror story, and it's virtually plotless until kind of the second, until like, I guess Act 3. But yeah, but it is so, I keep using the word ominous, but it is so creepy and disturbing. That's a better word. It's not a traditional horror story.
Right. Yeah. It's all about building that tension and just like this encroaching danger that's constantly coming for you.
The funny thing is, I didn't reread the whole short story, but kind of revisiting just the basics of it.
Yeah.
With this show, I'm struck by how Pit and the Pendulum, the plot is almost like, it almost feels like a Saw movie.
It does. It feels like a proto-Saw movie.
Yeah, proto is the right way. Yeah, he wakes up alone in the middle of nowhere, doesn't know where he is, trapped in a torture chamber, and he has to figure out why he's there and how he can get out. And it would not surprise me if Juan and Juanel were at least maybe partially inspired by Pit and the Pendulum.
I wouldn't doubt that at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or the movie or the short story.
Oh yeah, either one, right?
Yeah. So Stuart Gordon originally wanted to make this movie with Peter O'Toole playing Torquemada, and O'Toole was on board. He was into it. They even had a few rehearsals under their belt, but they lost funding for that production. Peter O'Toole was then unavailable when they finally did get the funding back, so they had to pivot, which means they moved over to our buddy Lance Henriksen. This is our first time talking about Lance Henriksen on this show, and I just want to give a little bit of a tiny bio because this guy's life is fascinating. For those who don't know about Lance Henriksen, he grew up as a troubled kid on the streets of New York. He left school in the first grade. So this man was functionally illiterate for his entire life until he turned 30 and taught himself to read. In the meantime, he deployed with the Navy. He served for 4 years. And while he was deployed in Europe, he agreed to help out with some set design work at a local theater. And that's kind of where he got bit by the acting bug. When he came back home after the service was over, he enrolled in the actor's studio to take lessons, taught himself to read, and became like a regular go-to supporting guy in a lot of movies like Close Encounters and Dog Day Afternoon. He appeared in a lot of stuff like that.
Matt, I don't want to interrupt your great your great bio. That is awesome. But to a kid, to an 80s kid.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, that's the guy. Because after Aliens, everybody loved him. Every movie nerd loved Lance Henriksen, and then Near
100%.
Dark kind of just cemented it. And then
unbelievable in Near Dark.
Yeah, I had already seen Dog Day Afternoon because that's a powerful, memorable movie. I know I had already seen it. I think it was on network television. That's how I saw it. Yeah. But revisiting it many years later, I'm like, he's one of the cops in Act 3. I'm like, that's Lance Henriksen. He's also has a very quick moment in Network, a quick moment in Jaws, not Jaws, Close Encounters,
right?
And Omen 2. Mm-hmm. So we know him from all these horror films and whatnot, but it's like it's so funny to go back to his early career and see him in so many like highly regarded films too.
I mean, he's just got this unbelievable.
Plays Wally Schirra in Right Stuff.
In Right Stuff, yeah, he does. I mean, he just got this unbelievable carved from granite kind of face. He's one of those guys who's looked like he's 80 years old his entire life. So
It's
the fact
funny,
that he's
Dog
We
Day
call that
Afternoon.
Harry Dean Stanton syndrome.
Yeah,
Yes.
in Dog Day Afternoon, you know, he still looks old, and he's probably 30.
Yeah. No, he was not very old back then. In 1982, he took a gig on this bad little B movie called Piranha 2: The Spawning, where he met the director, this Canadian truck driver named James Cameron, who decided he liked his whole vibe and wanted to write a movie around him where Henriksen would play a killer robot that came back from the future to hunt down a woman and prevent a war from happening.
And that movie was Back to the Future.
And he was ultimately replaced by Eric Stoltz, which was a shame.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but he was the original pick for the Terminator until Arnold walked onto the scene. And it's like, all right, well, yeah, that's kind of undeniable. We got to give it to this hulking Austrian monster.
I picture it. It's 1982, and he's got Lance Henriksen in mind, and he sits down in the theater to watch Conan the Barbarian, and he just crosses Lance's name off of a notepad. I've changed my mind.
What a good problem to have. You know, you're
great.
already like, all right, we know what kind of movie we're making with Lance Henriksen as our Terminator. We know that's a different kind of movie, but that could absolutely work.
Oh,
but
100%. Yeah.
Now you have like one of the biggest stars, literally largest, and he wants to be a bad guy for a movie. He's like, that's what he wanted at that point in his career. He wanted to play a villain.
Yeah.
And well, they obviously gave Lance Henriksen a decent role, a cop role.
Yeah,
and if I'm not mistaken, James Cameron cast him in literally every film since.
I don't know if he's been in all of them, but he definitely made the biggest impression in his next film, which was Aliens. And that's kind of what we're seeing now with The Pendulum, is sort of this great little miracle run that Lance Henriksen had of being a leading man. You know, he was always kind of a stoic supporting actor, but now we're in this nice little leading man run. Like you said, you have Near Dark, you have Pumpkinhead, you have Survival Quest, you have a bunch of Hard Target. He's a great villain in that.
Oh, he's so good in Hard. Oh, I fucking love Hard Target. But one of the things, and the casting
movie,
the casting is really fortuitous, because Peter O'Toole, I mean, he is obviously a guy with presence, but like, unfortunately, I mean, he can veer into the wrong kind of camp. And it's like, I envision the performance he gives Torquemada as like, not Lawrence of Arabia Peter O'Toole, but like Superman or Supergirl Peter O'Toole.
Sure.
The thing is, like, there are moments where Lance Henriksen has like this devilish demeanor to him. And God love the late Peter O'Toole, but I think at his scariest, he still would have been charming.
Exactly. Yeah, he's one of those guys who's just sort of permanently.
There's a twinkle there, no matter what, you know. Yeah. And there's like 2 or 3 moments.
Probably the booze, but yeah, still.
There's like 2 or 3 moments in this movie where Henriksen gets dark, not just vamping as a villain, but dark.
Apparently he refused to break character on set of this movie, which I would find insufferable personally. If I were on this set and he was walking around pretending to be a Spanish inquisitor, like, I would get a little sick of that after a little bit. And he and Stuart Gordon kind of butted heads during the production of this movie, because I don't think Henriksen was expecting this to be as funny as it is. And this is a genuinely funny movie in parts. Like, this is a satire for sure.
Well, can I stop you for a second, Stephen? So we'll obviously, our opinions on the movie will come out as we go on. And I feel like we're all generally favorable, even though we haven't really spoke much on the matter yet. But I will say one thing about the movie.
No one's asked me.
One thing about the movie that I feel like is kind of a knock against it is that I do think it is tonally inconsistent. Like, I think there's moments in it where it's kind of like the camp doesn't feel quite right. Like, we talked about Reanimator, we talked about From Beyond, which I feel like, and I'll say Dolls as well, where the horror and the darkness and the comedy is just really perfectly blended. And here it's like, it's like really early in the movie, and all of a sudden you're taking everything in, and you're like, okay, it's 1492 and we're in Spain. And then you see, you know, the wide-eyed doofus Stephen Lee doing basically the character that Bobby Moynihan would perfect in our recent times.
Yeah, he's an early Moynihan, and he's a Stuart Gordon guy too. We've seen him. He was in Dolls, and he's been in a few of the.
He'll always be the big bopper to me because
Very boring actor.
Yeah, well, I love La Bamba. I've loved it since I was a kid, and that's the first thing that even before the horror stuff, like even before Dolls and everything, when he jumped out to me, because we were just talking about him recently in a Prehysteria episode, because he plays the villain in that movie, and again another really big, broad, silly performance like he gives here, and so the tone was a little bit weird.
I apologize. You're talking about Stephen Lee, who plays Gomez. I thought you were talking about the younger male lead.
Oh yeah. No, that's the Jonathan Fuller, the future castle freak himself. Yeah.
No. Stephen Lee is a fine B character actor, and I'm sure you were going to mention it, but not only do we got the legendary Oliver Reed, he shows up late, but his whole mini subplot is maybe the creepiest stuff in the whole movie.
Right, because that's where they start sourcing other Poe stories.
And then becomes kind of Poe's greatest hits.
Yeah, that's where it's like Cask of Amontillado or Black Cat. He had a thing for walling people up and stuff.
And I find that filmmakers from Corman to Gordon to, everybody, it's like, to do Poe, you melange three together.
Yeah.
Well, it's not unlike Lovecraft, because we talked a lot about how Lovecraft is really like not a particularly talented writer of prose, but he was an idea guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so with Poe, I think it's
agree.
I think
his prose is fascinating, but gets tiresome. But his stories, like for example, if you were to find somebody, a historian who would translate, say, Nordic mythology into English, that book would be amazing. Now that's how I feel about this. If somebody could translate into English,
we feel the same way. Like Lovecraft is always best when it's taken away from Lovecraft, when somebody can interpret his work and work with his ideas.
I think that At the Mountain of Madness is an absolute masterpiece. I mean, all the bullshit aside about his shitty nature and shitty position as a human being, and a lot of his stuff is overblown and overwrought, but he wrote a handful of things that I think are absolutely excellent. But we're here to talk about Poe.
Yeah, and I kind of feel the same way about Poe in a lot of ways too. Like, because Poe was also a pretty unpleasant person.
One of my favorite stories of his. This is because it's the least conventional, and it is kind of like, what is going on?
But again, it's a very short story, so they do need to kind of stretch and elaborate on it if you want to make a feature film out of it.
I can't remember the guy who did The Witch.
Eggers.
Yeah. I would like to pay Robert Eggers to do a 90-minute adaptation of Hop Frog.
Yes.
No, don't melange it with three other stories. I just want that story.
Just that. Everybody can have as many mustaches as they want.
I was going to make a joke about this, saying like that the story is very short and they need to stretch it out. I was going to say, but this is a full moon movie, so they only added 12 more pages.
Exactly. They put it on the rack and they cranked it a few times.
I
think is where to follow up with what you said. I think the stuff that is faithful or the scariest stuff is really effective in this movie. But the stuff that Paoli came up with to kind of like just plot it out, I don't care so much about the two leads. I really don't. It feels like a lesser Hammer script.
I like her performance more than his.
Yes.
Yeah, and I like Jonathan Fuller, but here he's not given a whole lot to do. I found myself losing interest with like the witch subplot where she's actually a witch. I'm just like that's just kind of muddying the waters for me.
Right. The movie kind of forgets about that in favor of, boy, is Torquemada crazy.
But I mean, I loved what they hit on. Like, I think this movie sets its tone and like issues its mission statement so well in the very opening scene, which is detailing them exhuming a corpse, putting that corpse on trial, and then beating the shit out of it. It's so such a great, this whole movie is a big satire on religious fanaticism, particularly not just of the Inquisition era, but just in general, and how it stems from all the sexual repression. And this movie just really goes hard right off the bat by just having this patently silly image that you're opening the movie with. And there's a lot of other silly moments that happen throughout the film.
Hey, you know what's silly right in the beginning? The visual introduction of Jeffrey Combs.
Yes.
Because he looks like Jim J. Bullock in Spaceballs with that hairstyle.
He looks like he belongs on a paint can.
And I love Jeffrey Combs' line deliveries, because in every movie, like you know he's going to go big, and I love that about him. And I love that he will find a way to make, and this is not an insult. This is, I enjoy Jeffrey Combs' performances. I love.
Oh,
Jeffrey Combs'
he knows what he's doing. If he's going over the top, he knows he
finds a way to deliver lines to people as if he's perennially angry at everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I just
not angry. He's disappointed.
That's it. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But one of my favorite things about this movie, and I had forgotten it, and it seems like smart directing or producing, call it what you will, but every time the movie starts to sag, you get somebody like Mark Margolis or Tom Tolles or the great Oliver Reed, and they're like, oh, here's a great scene with a fun character actor. You know, like they're there to like prop the movie up in between, like if you start to get a little tired.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they really cast very smartly. I was also noting, like, this for a movie that's only like, what is this, 30 years old, 33 years old, they have a lot of dead cast members in this. A lot of people who have passed. We lost Stephen Lee. We just lost Mark Margolis like 2 weeks ago. Francis Bay, Rona DiRicci, Stuart Gordon, Oliver Reed, all of them are gone. Which is a little stark for me, being, alive and conscious.
Well, it makes this movie, and which works because this is a period piece. It gives the movie an older feel. And
it also, just to interject real quick, it's a movie full of like older stage adults. It's not about really, except for the two kids, it's about older people. So don't stress out too much. Plus, we still have the awesome Lance Henricksen.
Well, at this time,
and
in Full Moon's history, what Charles Band was trying to do was he was trying to have two companies, essentially. He was, because Empire had folded. And this is one that had been or at least in pre-production for a long time. Stuart Gordon wanted to do this while Empire was still a company. And it was one of the things they were most excited about.
I got my timeline mixed up. Why did I think Empire was after?
Oh no, Empire was before. Empire died in 1989.
Okay,
and they moved to Full Moon pretty much immediately after that.
And it was supposed
do
to
you
be
have
Full
any
Moon.
knowledge on
ahead,
why? Because you guys are the experts. Would you have any knowledge on why a producer would just like shut down a successful production company and immediately open another
There's
one?
a lot of insight about that in Band's autobiography.
Okay.
It's partially poor investments, and partially he got a little screwed by a trusted family friend who he brought into the company, who kind of undermined him a bit.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so he basically was like,
because it seems shady, and I don't necessarily mean shady on his behalf. It just means like if you close your production company and immediately open another one, like what happened?
Yeah, so he was apparently in debt to a bunch of different people to keep Empire chugging along, and a family friend was basically like, oh, I have an in with Credit Suisse, and I can get your debts paid off. All you have to do is kind of sign over everything from Empire. And he basically did it to erase all debts because he is kind of a mover and a shaker. I mean, I'm sure was looking down the line.
Yeah, you got to play the game, and that includes, writing things off as his tax loss. It's like it's not optimal, but you got to do it.
Right.
And
well,
that's
then what
something
happened
the band was excellent at. Yeah. Okay.
He found out after the fact that the family friend who had said he would maneuver this deal for him took on like a title as like the head of the president of whatever this other agency is that took all the debt from Charles Band. So he got screwed out of that, and he didn't really stew about it for too long. He got Full Moon up and running, and Full Moon was supposed to be the straight to video, and there was supposed to be another company called Band Company, which was supposed to deal with bigger potentially theatrically released movies. And what happened was, Steve mentioned before about the company losing financing. That was Vestron Video. Video, who were putting up a lot of money for Pit and the Pendulum, which was originally supposed to be shot in a studio in England, like we said, Peter O'Toole. And then what happened was they They went
They
out
were
of business.
huge. I don't
Oh,
know. I
they
mean, you
that
guys are
Vestron,
about my age, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah.
we're a little younger,
Vestron,
but we
yeah,
were
around
in
there.
the
very
80s, if it
yeah.
wasn't a major studio, and sometimes even if it was, but Vestron's logo was on so many movies.
Well, I have it on multiple T-shirts, and I'm also, if you could
Yes.
see, Scott, I'm wearing a Media
Yep.
Home Entertainment T-shirt right now because listeners can't see, but by us telling it, they know I like to come prepared.
Oh yes, you have a
For the-
shirt for every occasion. Yeah, you're
I
I'm
do.
looking here. We're going into a sub tangent, but now I just ran through Empire's list. And what would you say overall, Empire or Full Moon has the better track record? Which one?
I think Empire, because it was so
Yeah.
short, and within that time, I mean, they knocked it out of the park a few times. I mean, there's some duds in there too. Don't get me wrong. Sorry, Charles, if you're listening, but I
I'm
think
sure he'd be the first to admit that. Yeah.
Well, if
Yeah.
you're listening, Charles, you should know that in 1986, I made my father take me to see Eliminators, and he hated it. He was actively mad at me, as if a 12 or 14-year-old kid knew it was going to be that bad.
so the reason I bring this up
Yeah.
is because if they were forced to then go and film this in Italy using the castle that Charles Band actually owned at this point in Italy, he had bought a castle in Italy, and when he first bought it, it wasn't really habitable. But by 1990, when they actually were now going to work on this, it was. And so he had investors come and stay in the castle, and he schmoozed them, and he got, originally this was supposed to be like a $6 or $7 million movie. The budget ended up being about somewhere between 1 and 2. But I think one of the things that gives this movie a lot of charm, and we mentioned this with Subspecies, we mentioned this with Meridian, is I love the fact that this is not just shot on a film studio, that these are real interior locations in castle. Like, I feel like it just gives it such a really authentic look, and they just got people from the town, were just extras in the movie. And it was just like that. It was the town in Italy was not very technologically advanced, so they didn't have to do a ton to redress it to make it look, I'm not an expert, so I couldn't tell you how accurate, but I do feel like, is this their Full Moon's most ambitious? Because Puppet Master 3, listeners have heard this episode by now. We really thought that taking on Nazi Germany and trying to have it be period specific was really ambitious for a Full Moon movie. And I feel like that was even David Dakota who was directing that movie. And this is Stuart Gordon, who I think is, we can all agree is head and shoulders above. Like, was this, in your opinion, like, does this feel to you like one of the most ambitious things that they did?
It definitely feels like a prestige film by Full Moon standards. It's a period film, it's based on a classic piece of literature. You've got this great cast with a lot of reputable actors. Like, so I don't know how much ambition they had beyond like making a handsomely mounted movie, but it is one of their most prestigious. Like, if there were a Full Moon movie to submit to award season, this would be the one, right?
They didn't do any other Poe after this, did they?
I don't think so. Yeah, not much. They went back to Lovecraft a few more times with and without Stuart Gordon, but yeah, I don't know if there was any other Poe stories. So I mean, it's pretty.
I think that's a fair point. When you're like, even for like a B movie company, if you're adapting Poe and you're doing period design, that is their version of prestige on their level, on their budget level. So I think you're probably right. I think this probably was like we're not just making like boobs and gore movies too. Like, we can also do something like with a little bit of literary heft to it.
Yeah, I get that feeling
this isn't a
watching
boobs and gore
this.
movie. Yeah.
No, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's both of those things, but I also feel like you get those in Puppet Master 3, but that also has that, like you said, like prestige feeling for a Full Moon movie, and I also feel that way about Subspecies 2.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I think the points in this movie that work the best are the ones that stick a little bit closer to the Poe text, and I think some of the stretching that they have to do to bring this to feature length isn't quite there. But I will say Henriksen is really committed and really good in this movie. I think he tapped into something that weirdly, I think the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame would tap into also a couple years after this, which is that this religious fanaticism is driven by internal lust and maybe a humiliation kink. You know, we talked about From Beyond is a very kink focused movie, and it's still a little unclear on whether Gordon is fascinated by this world or repelled by it, or maybe a little bit of both. But I think this one is also playing into some of those same BDSM themes, and in this case using it to translate into what drives somebody to do all these religious atrocities, what drives somebody to be so single-mindedly cruel and vicious. And it's that conflict of the spiritual and the physical.
Yeah.
I think it's Stuart Gordon's Hammer movie.
Yes.
I mean, like it feels like he watched his favorite Hammer films and said, all right, now I'm ready to do a Poe adaptation.
Definitely.
You know, because it definitely does get into some of the depravity and torture and everything, but it's not excessive about it. It doesn't wallow in it like a Hostel Part 2 kind of thing.
No,
I think it's a good horror film, but it's not what, you know, that's not what they're going for with this Pit and the Pendulum. It has moments of ugh, but it's never like, oh God, cut away already, you know, like.
Yeah, it never to borrow a term that would not exist for another couple of years. It never really dips into torture porn, this movie, despite there literally being what you think of if you think of torture devices. There are all over this movie.
There might be a really interesting sidebar podcast on cinematic representations of the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, because there aren't many. I think the movie,
and they all feel like this.
I mean, yeah, the movie I kept thinking of, and I can't remember if that's Spanish Inquisition or not, but was Witchfinder General.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and so that's the Vincent Price movie
from
Salem
Witch Trials.
Salem Witch Trial. That's it. Yeah, but it's a similar kind of vibe. Like I think they were paying a lot of tribute to that sort of.
But there's something
movie
about the Spanish Inquisition being notably older, and we have less information, and it always is just like, oh, you just chain people up in castles and stab them with things. Like,
I mean, I think the moment I got the biggest laugh in the entire movie was they are about to escort Esmeralda to the pyre, and Jeffrey Combs pulls her aside and says, "I'm so sorry we couldn't get your confession. We didn't have time to torture you." And there's something that's so funny about
playing it like a DMV employee.
Yes, exactly. There's a bureaucracy to,
and I love the arc of that character because
Yes.
you start at the beginning, you think, oh, he's going to be even worse than Torquemada. He's not. He's not, and he actually has somewhat of a mildly redemptive arc.
Yeah, he's just kind of a functionary, you know, and I like the idea that these atrocities are happening right now, and he's just treating it like he's working off a clipboard, you know.
It's as simple as you don't need to do anything more with that character other than cast Stuart Gordon. I mean, Jeffrey Combs. That's it. That's it. Like,
if you want to convey that he's a bookish weirdo, then you got it. You're done.
Yes. It's inestimable what a great actor can bring to a B movie, a movie 10 times cheaper than this one, or a Scorsese film. It's just an unspoken magical thing that you're like, oh, even if I hated this movie, I would love Jeffrey Combs and Lance Henriksen in it.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Combs elevates so many things too, because like we were talking about Reanimator before, and we haven't done our episode on it yet on the show, but I love Reanimator. It's probably my top 10 favorite movies of all time, and I can revisit it endlessly, and I never get tired of it.
As a guy who lived through the 80s, I would say that Reanimator is maybe top 5 horror films of the entire decade. Absolutely, with like up there with Evil Dead. And
Nightmare on Elm Street was
Elm Street 1. It's got to be.
Yeah.
I mean, Reanimator, Elm Street. It has got to be top 5, right? I mean, for just uniqueness and or if you want to qualify it a little more, best horror comedies of the 80s, top 3.
Well, the craziest thing to me is that you could have caught Reanimator and Return of the Living Dead in the theater in the same summer.
I did another one I caught on VHS and just went, oh, now that's how you do it. That's how you make it funny and scary. It's not easy, but when films do it right, it looks easy.
Well, and I don't know if Reanimator is as successful as it is if you have anybody other than Jeffrey Combs playing Herbert West.
No, all of those characters are slightly stylized. Abbott is like slightly more stiff and earnest than he should be, and Barbara Crampton is slightly more playful and bubbly than she should be, and the dean is much more arch and ominous than he should. Every character is put up to 11. So then when things start to like characters start carrying their own heads around on tray, you know, you're already halfway to, oh, it's a comedy. I got it. I got it. Then the stuff with the cat, as much as it hurts me to say it, the stuff with the cat, you know, it's darkly funny. It's darkly funny, but it is funny.
Yeah. And I mean, I think at its best moments, Pit and the Pendulum kind of taps into some of that sort of humor where it's so far over the top, and the humor is just in how gross and how excessive it can be. Like I really thought the scene of Tom Tallis getting cut in half by the pendulum was really funny. Just this shot of like a little splatter of gore and then a shot of half a hat on the ground, and then later you see his body and it's clear he's laying in a hole in the ground, but like
and you could just see Stuart Gordon and I don't even know off the top of my head. Let me check who shot it. Who shot this movie?
I don't know.
You could just see them. Yeah.
So this is the person who shot this movie. He's the guy who kind of took over. No, so he took over after Mac Ahlberg, because we've talked about Mac Ahlberg a ton. He's a guy who shot so much, but this is Adolfo Bartoli, who essentially is a guy who is a protege to a bunch of really well-known Italian directors, and just a guy who came on board. I think this was his first project with Charles Band, and he has since gone on to do like 30-something Full Moon movies, I think.
Some of it is, you know, very standard, but occasionally there's a shot where you're like, wow, that's quite impressive.
Pretty good.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was just picturing like Gordon and his DP sitting around going, all right, how do we do the aftermath of this? You know, we don't want it to be gruesome, but also kind of playful.
Yeah. And there's a really weird structure to this movie, a film called The Pit and the Pendulum. We do not get the Pit and the Pendulum scene until the last 15 minutes of the movie. It's not a very long movie, but
this is the Jason Takes Manhattan of Spanish Inquisition movies.
Right.
As is often said, yes.
In the documentary, The Pendulum Still Isn't Working, I heard that they had to hide the pit and the pendulum throughout the movie for budgetary reasons.
Oh, really?
No,
I believe it.
I know where you're going with that.
Thank you. I'm being facetious. I'm just making a joke about Jaws. But no, like, here's the thing. Like, I'm trying to be a screenwriter. I've written a few scripts and some shorts, and I'm trying to think, like, knowing what I remember about the short story, and somebody were to say, build a 90-page script around that.
Yeah.
This is, without having seen this movie, this is kind of what I'd probably come up with, you know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. You hit all the beats. You get you get enough time with each of the characters to kind of fill them out.
We have to spend
doomed romance to get, you know, again, all that stuff. Again, everything that's not deep Poe reminds me of Act 1 of every late stage Hammer film.
Right. Weirdly, I was thinking of post Duck Soup Marx Brothers movies, how they always needed to have like a boring romantic couple jammed in just so you can make the movie a little bit longer. Yeah, that's kind of what these two are doing.
The straight subplot. It's
we have to know exactly how Antonio feels about the bread.
Yes, he loves that bread.
And Jonathan Fuller, the way he says the word bread. I mean, listen, I'm not concerned about accents. Like, I don't mind everybody's speaking in their own accents. Like, that's fine. That kind of thing doesn't really bother me. But the way he said, I have not heard a person say the word bread the way he does since Nicolas Cage in Moonstruck.
Do it for us.
Bread.
Yeah,
I bake
a little bit.
Bread. Yeah,
bread.
I was cracking up listening to that. But we made fun of his performance a little bit in the movie, just saying that, you know, it's a little stiff or whatever. Rona DeRicci's performance, I think, is pretty good for, you know, an unknown who has to do a decent amount. Like, I think it's fine.
She has a lot of lifting to do. She does fine. She does. She's an
interesting case because this is her first leading role, and it's also her very last film. She walked away from the industry because, would you believe it, male producers are pretty sleazy and really only wanted her to be in like kind of nudie flicks after this. That was the only thing she was really being considered for. And so she decided to walk away from that. We did lose her back in 2020. I think she was 59. I'm not clear on how she died, but she did die pretty young. which is a shame. I think she's talented. I think she should have been in more stuff than she was in. Yeah, but I struggled a bit, like I mentioned, with the witch subplot. I mean, we have Esmeralda, played by Frances Bay, aka Happy Gilmore's grandmother, which was interesting to see her in that
AKA the
context.
Marble Rye lady from Seinfeld.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Isn't she also the lady in the Mouth of Madness who turns into like the innkeeper? Am I getting her mixed up with another actress?
We're talking about like deep tier character actors, and I mean that with respect. I don't mean like what you would call, for lack of a better phrase, A-list character actors. Every movie geek knows who Shea Wiggum is, but he's a character actor.
Right.
Yeah.
This woman, everybody, movie geek, TV nerd, everybody in the world knows this woman. Nobody knows her name.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is Frances Bay and In the Mouth of Madness.
Yes, it is. Okay.
And
yeah.
they're really pushing the envelope now, because on Righteous Gemstones this past season, they had both Shea Wiggum and Steve Zahn in the same show, and those guys are aging into the same person.
In the same frame?
Not in the same frame, but I
love both of those guys, and I would kill to write a road comedy in which Shea Wiggum and Steve Zahn are estranged brothers who hate each other but have to go on a road trip together.
Oh my God, the yelling.
Get this
No, it wouldn't be that much yelling. One of them would be like just a quiet angry, and the other is Steve Zahn. Steve Zahn would be the kind of manic angry, and Shea Wiggum would be the quiet angry.
Yeah.
And like
Shea Wiggum would be the Peter Stormare of the
just like something. The Steve Buscemi, exactly. It's like a high concept comedy where they have to go on a 24-hour road trip together and arrive together to win $10 million, and that's the whole movie.
I would watch that back to back. I would watch multiple showings of that back to back. I mean, yeah.
It goes back to what I just said. I just gave you the most basic plot in the world, but you're excited because it's Shea Wiggum and Steve Zahn.
Exactly right.
If this movie didn't have an Oliver Reed, a Mark Margolis, a Lance Henriksen, we'd be like bored to tears, honestly.
Yeah, and Frances Bay's performance is pretty fun and over the top. I never thought I would hear Happy Gilmore's grandmother say a cunt with teeth.
Yeah.
but she does. Let's talk a little bit about Oliver Reed, because he's fun in
the Rye. The Marvel, you got me laughing. I love that episode.
No, I know. It's like those two things are always what pop into my brain. There's a really funny anecdote about Oliver Reed and his legendary Andre the Giant like drinking. To where they would
Andre the Giant was a heavy drinker. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, no, he dabbled.
I know nothing about wrestling. Nothing. I know more about ancient Egypt than I do wrestling.
I thought you were being sarcastic there. Yeah. Andre the Giant was known for drinking. He drank like 150 beers in one night or something, and like 4 bottles of wine, this was commonplace for him. But Oliver Reed,
Oliver Reed. I mean, again, Oliver Reed was of my parents or even my grandparents' generation. And even then, growing up, you just suck things in by osmosis. And when you think of Oliver Reed, people say, oh, yeah, he was a drunk.
Yeah, that's kind of become his defining legacy. Yeah.
Right. And no disrespect, because the man left. I mean, he's a brilliant actor. He really was.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's just like it's odd the little remnants we leave behind.
I would just love to like party with Richard Harris, Oliver Reed, and Peter O'Toole just for one night. Just
don't forget Richard Burton.
Oh, and Richard Burton, yeah.
What is it of British actors of that generation that were just
don't invite Rex Harrison. He's a fucking monster.
Wild,
yeah, everybody else.
Yeah, I don't know, but apparently he would wake up and drink immediately from waking up, and then he would go on set and they'd call action, and he would do his takes flawlessly and be super
Peter Sellers
professional.
I don't.
I don't know. I picture him playing drunk, but I'm like imagining him in what's that movie, The Party?
Yeah.
I don't know if he was in real life.
How did
But,
we get into this?
because
Was
Oliver-
Peter Sellers a drunk? He said on the Full Moon Entertainment or
It's-
Empire podcast.
So,
Well,
listen,
that's what we're saying. The legacy of Oliver Reed's drunkenness is so strong that it's bringing up all of this. Yeah,
exactly. And listeners, if you know,
Well,
if
you
Peter
know, I'm
Sellers
sorry,
was a
rest
drunk,
in-
puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com. Let us know.
Rest in peace, Oliver Reed and Andre
Yeah.
the Giant.
So he would do his take and he would be perfect. And then they would go out and they would have a meal and drinks afterward. And he would just sit and drink beer after beer after beer, wine, all this stuff. And to the point where people were like, how is this guy functioning? How's he not getting up from the table? He would sit there for hours on end, just drinking nonstop. And it turns out he had created an apparatus where he would just sit and piss into old bottles.
Yeah, but you're still drinking it.
Right. But I just,
Like, so
but they would say he
out
would do it
immediately,
uninterrupted.
no matter how unsanitarily, you're still going to get still hitting your liver.
I guess
Oh,
it
yeah.
was more people were like, how is he would sit uninterrupted.
you were
He
gonna
wouldn't get
say-
up. He wouldn't use the
Yeah,
bathroom.
how is he not going up? And
I thought you were going to say that he would order drinks like every 20 minutes, but then people would realize he had a bucket and he poured out every second and third drink and only drank the
No,
third.
not this guy.
I
How
have
dare
heard
you
that.
even suggest it?
I have heard that about Dean Martin. I've heard that Dean Martin's drinking was over exaggerated, and that
But
sometimes
then you
people
start
would,
to wonder,
dump
like,
those out.
why?
Yeah.
would you
Yeah,
want
why?
someone
Yeah.
to think you're drinking more than you are?
It was
was just a shtick,
commitment,
yeah.
commitment to the shtick, to the bit, and Oliver Reed's committed in his scene. And
Yeah,
I will say,
he-
I don't think Dudley Moore was a drunk, but Arthur sure was.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Yeah. No, I think I love seeing Oliver Reed here just very briefly. You know, he as the kids say, he understood his assignment. He
He
showed
really
up. He had a
brings
little bit
them,
of,
you know, it's like the gravitas. It's nowadays you would point it to like what a Robert Redford brings to a Marvel movie. But when we were a kid, when I was a kid, it was what Laurence Olivier brings to Clash of the Titans. And it's like
exactly.
an
Yeah.
old school theatrical type gravitas.
I thought you were going to say what Laurence Olivier brings to Inchon.
Or
I don't think I've ever seen that one.
Singer.
I'm kidding. Please, let's not go on that tangent.
Was it
Yeah.
Leonard Maltin or was it Roger Ebert? Somebody, a famous film critic, said for a generation, Laurence Olivier was known as the guy Zeus
Yeah.
in Clash of the Titans. And it's like, yeah, that's how it works. To an entire generation of kids, Robert Redford is that guy from Captain America 3. And then as they get older, they might want to delve back into his career and go, wow, what an amazing career this guy had. But yeah, that's how generations are introduced to actors when they're in big movies. I think
I can't remember the last time somebody
why else
mentioned
would a
all,
15 what would a 15-year-old kid know Michael Douglas from, if not Ant-Man?
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like the last several times Orson Welles has been brought up to me, someone
Yes,
had to point out that
perfect
he was a
example.
Unicron in Transformers.
Now, oh yes,
It's like,
I am a monstrous movie nerd, so I will delve back into history and watch biopics and documentaries and all that. But when I was younger, I feel like I'm yelling, but when I was younger, Orson Welles was just known as that formerly amazing guy who is now fat and angry.
yeah, who did the wine commercial
Yep.
and like played a transformer and like yeah. So I mean, it's I
Marlon
think
Brando, that's another perfect one. All right, we could just keep going.
I think we've had a lot of people like in this movie specifically who like found a bit of a renaissance later on, like Mark Margolis was one of those jobbing character actors for his
One of
entire
those
career, and
completely
then
anonymous, and I mean that with
Yeah.
respect, but anonymous.
course.
Like, you know his face from 100 things, but you could not tell me his name. And then he showed up on Breaking Bad, and
yeah, exactly.
was just astonishingly good on that show. And he's always been good. You find any movie where Mark Margolis is in it, he's earning his check. But
100%.
yeah, an entire generation is reminded of how great he was in Breaking Bad. And if it wasn't for Breaking Bad, maybe we don't even stop to note him being in this
Right,
movie.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, no, yeah, we
Mhm.
don't see his obituary popping up when he passed away a couple weeks. Yeah, the first thing is mentioned, like the guy who plays Salamanca has died. You know, like you remember that one scene, and it's cool that I mean it's just always fascinating to me how long acting careers can be and how you can find second, third, fourth, fifth wins like all the way up to your 80s.
Warren
like, I think
Oates.
it's cool. I think
Warren
it's
Oates
cool.
died way too young, and I know he was in dozens of movies. All I can know of Warren Oates, Stripes,
Yes. Yeah.
Sergeant Hulka. But it's like it's a generational thing. How we got off on this tangent is so weird. But
Listen, we
bring it
said
back
it
to
before.
Lance Henriksen.
Tangents are welcome, always welcome. Let's bring it. Let's do it, Scott. Let's bring it back to Lance Henriksen.
I want to just say, everybody listening to this podcast, go to Wikipedia and look at this man's body of work. He has not stopped working. And you'll say, yes, Scott, a lot of those movies are like really, really bad. Okay, but
Sure.
a lot of those movies are really, really bad, and he's still the best thing in them. Like
Always.
Yeah. I mean, I have not seen a good portion of his late career stuff, but
he's had a good run in video games the last couple of years. Like he's in all the Mass Effect games, and like he's got an incredible voice. Yeah, he absolutely does. And, like,
the villain in Tarzan, right?
Oh, was he really? In which one? The Skarsgård one
or something? Isn't he a villain in a bad guy? I don't know his name in Tarzan. Was that the Disney one? Oh, he plays the dad. Does he play an ape's dad?
Oh, I don't remember. Oh, he does play an ape's dad.
He plays a character, and I only know this because it's been a long time since I've seen Disney's Tarzan. But he plays a character called Kerchak.
That's it. Yeah, he's like the chief of the gorillas. Yeah, who doesn't want to adopt Tarzan. Yeah, he's a good.
Oh, and I'm just running through his filmography, and you're just like, wouldn't watch that. No interest in that. You know, junkie action film Part 7, and then you see something like The Quick and the Dead,
which he's amazing in. Like,
not only is it a great movie, but he's got like 4 scenes, and he is so great in every scene as like this cocky bounty hunter, MFer. You can't wait to see he get shot, and boy, does he.
And I mean, and like, we had, I mentioned some of his earlier like leading roles. He's the lead in a really underrated horror movie called Pumpkinhead, which I think the Stan Winston movie. He's fantastic in that. Like he's like a great villain. Yeah, he was on that show Millennium for a couple of years.
Yeah, he was a dad in Pumpkinhead whose little boy is accidentally killed by irresponsible young motorbikers in the desert, and it's very much just a basic revenge tale. But like, you think, all right, well, Lance Henriksen getting revenge on the evil teenagers who killed his kid. That's him in a nutshell. That I get all that. But it's the first half hour of Pumpkinhead where you're like, God damn, he's a good actor.
Yeah.
Pumpkinhead is one of those movies where every time the seasons start to change over the last like 5 or 6 years, I'm like, I need to remember, find Pumpkinhead. If it's on streaming somewhere, remember to put it into my October rotation. And I either forget or I can't find it somewhere where you can stream it without having to rent it. But you know what? I was just thinking about this movie earlier today when I was preparing for the show, and the other day watching the movie, and I was like, I gotta remember to have that on there. Like Pumpkinhead is going. I'll pay the $4 on Prime Video to rent it if I have to.
I don't like to call stuff like essentials, but like if you're talking about like mood essentials for Halloween, and you wanted to like put on let's say your goal was to give me a background movie for every night of October. And I'm not going to, maybe I've seen it, maybe I haven't, but it's just something to like evoke the look, the mood, the sound, the feel of, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Halloween season movie, but Pumpkinhead is, and it would be in my top 10 of that project.
It's so like, it's got such a fairy tale, like a gothic fairy tale vibe to it too. So that's so perfect for setting the mood for that.
And again, he's fantastic in it. Yeah.
Oh, he's so good. He's so good. I think I've come to the end of my notes about Pit and the Pendulum. Did we have any other things that we wanted to mention about that?
No, I'm looking at my notes now, and I'm kind of in the same boat. I think we touched on just about everything that I wanted to this point for the movie. The only thing that I had written down that I didn't say really on mic was that the part when Antonio is escaping is played a little comically for my taste. It's a little Three Stooges-y, the way they're kind of bumping into each other. But again, they're trying to balance tones, and a lot of it is supposed to be kind of silly.
Yeah, if you can't manage to get it in the same scene, at least get it in the same movie. And you could see Gordon trying to balance it. Like, that was pretty gruesome. I'd like to have something lighter now. Right. And it's not maybe not hilarious, but it serves the film.
Yeah, the stigmata on Mark Margolis's hands is pretty great when Lance Henriksen sticks his like thumbs or fingers into the palms of his hands. It was a cool effect, and then taking the little crucifix and opening it up to show the knife was a lot of fun. There were just little things about it, but I think we've sort of.
I fell
Go
down
ahead,
a
Scott.
rabbit hole. I'm sorry. It's amazing. Lance Henriksen is not just in a lot of video games, but Mass Effect, Assault on Dark Athena, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2, Star Wars Old Republic. Is that a good one or a bad one? I think that's a good one.
That one's the online only one, so I haven't played that.
He's in
one
all 3 Mass Effects. He's in Aliens, Colonial Marines, which I don't think, whatever. But the point is, he's done. I'm just fascinated by his video gameography.
I played one that he was in last year called The Quarry, which is one of those kind of interactive movie games, and he's like the patriarch of a hillbilly family, which is really cool. Like it's a great game. Yeah,
I would just see him as like if you were to reboot Command and Conquer. He'd be like the Red Faction. Go build a bridge. Build a bridge and blow up their town.
Oh, I'd be surprised he wasn't in one of those already.
Yeah, love him. There, when you're done with this podcast, write this idea down. Start at the very beginning and do the Lance Henriksen podcast. I mean, a lot of people have done
Patreon.com.
A lot of people have done Nicolas Cage. A lot of people, I'm sure, have done Tom Cruise or an actor you love, big or small, doesn't matter. It's a fun concept to go through someone's entire filmography, but to do one episode for each of Lance Henriksen's movies would take you
a couple years. Yeah.
Okay, so wait, Scott, you have his filmography open?
Yeah.
Okay. How's numbers wise? How's his filmography stacking up against Eric Roberts?
Oh, Eric Roberts is probably double the size.
Eric Roberts, like anytime you look at his IMDb, which I do frequently, you will, if you see like upcoming projects, it's usually in it's in the 50s. Like, so many.
It's fun to look at, but until something's released in this realm, in this B and C grade area of filmmaking, I don't count them until they come out.
Yeah, it's a Schrodinger's Eric Roberts.
He has 96 current upcoming projects on IMDb.
Yeah.
Last Lance Henriksen film I watched is one from 2019 called Exorcism at 60,000 Feet.
Okay.
Which is watchable.
I was seeing one where he is like in a serious drama with Viggo Mortensen and Laura Linney, where he's playing Viggo's like alcoholic father, and they're like reconciling before he passes. And apparently he was getting some good like film festival notices from that. So he might be pulling like a late stage like Harry Dean Stanton kind of Oscar push, which I would be in favor of. I think he's been an underappreciated actor for a long time.
I think he works on the level he's given. I mean, like if somebody like Quentin Tarantino came out tomorrow and said, I need him to play this psycho video store owner that I have in my brain, then Lance Henriksen's room would be like, yeah, we love this fucking guy. Great comeback. But the guy works nonstop. Oh, and in 2017, he was in a good Nicolas Cage movie called Mom and Dad. Forgot about that one.
Oh yeah, that was a fun movie. Yeah.
I don't think I know that one. I'll have to check that out. But I think this movie, like this is the higher up, I think, in terms of like your average full moon quality. It's full moon reaching a little bit for a prestige picture. And I just think you have a really fun cast of weathered character actors. You have capable hands of Stuart Gordon. You have beautiful real Italian castle to shoot these interiors of. It's just a really authentic feel to it. I think for a B movie, I mean, I'm not the person who could nitpick the details, but I think the period details are like reasonably believable. And I just think like this is a pretty decent quality film. I think this is probably one of the better ones we've watched so far. I would say that even outside of the parameters of like, well, we have to judge everything as it's a full moon movie, or as it's an Empire movie, or as it's just a Charles Band Productions production movie. I think this is good. I mean, I could see somebody throwing this thing on, and again, like all the other full moon stuff, it's 97 minutes. So this is essentially like the Berlin Alexander plots of full moon movies,
basically. Yeah.
So I had a lot of fun watching it this time. It was not a first time watch for me. I had seen it, I believe, only once before, but probably at a time when I was diving into Lance Henriksen's filmography a little bit more, maybe a decade, 15 or so years ago. But no, I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of it this time, and I think this is a full moon movie that is, very much. And I'm going to say this, and I don't mean it as an insult at all to Full Moon, but it really operates with a level of legitimacy that almost elevates it above B movie status. I think it's I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it. I really love the cast for the most part, and I will probably revisit this one like I will Subspecies 2 and Puppet Master 3 and a couple of the other ones. But yeah,
Yeah,
I went in not remembering if I was going to like it as much or if my opinion was going to slide a little bit, but no, I liked it even more this time around.
I'm with you. I liked this movie a lot. This is never really going to be spoken about with like From Beyond or Reanimator, which are Gordon's like really top tier movies, but he does bring a thoughtfulness to B movies that a lot of other directors don't really bother with. I think he's a very literate guy. I think he's a very smart guy. And I think his approach to this movie is strong. Like, I like that he leaned on humor more than I was expecting. I like that he leaned on satire, and yeah, like you said, he had just an incredible cast of character actors. I had a great time with this movie.
Scott, what are your final thoughts on it?
Say on any scale, I would give this a 3 out of 5 stars. It's definitely
That's a fair rating.
I think that it suffers from being a bit episodic, and plot wise, there are things like you said, like the stuff about her being an actual witch, the things that are introduced that aren't really paid off. And I think it speaks, like Reanimator doesn't have that, like it speaks to like post-production issues that maybe just things were trimmed to the bone. And so what we have is a handful. Let's say if the movie is a collection of scenes, most of them work. I think individually the scenes are a lot of fun. As a whole, I have trouble remembering much of it.
Yeah. No, I could see that. Yeah, I think there's going to be some bits that I'm going to remember more clearly than others. Yeah, it does get a bit soggy in the middle.
As far as I hate to keep harping on the same thing, but as far as like Stuart Gordon evoking Hammer and Poe, it's definitely entertaining. I mean, it's definitely worth a look for horror fans. Absolutely.
What I won't forget is Francis Bay exploding.
Yes.
Can't forget that.
Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us about this movie, about Stuart Gordon, and your, history with just film in general. You're a really knowledgeable guy, and I just had a feeling that like you would fit right into the conversation with the kind of the things you like to evoke and the things that you like to talk about. So thank you from both of us just for taking time out of your day to chat with us about Pit and the Pendulum.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invite.
Well, of course. And can you tell people where to find your stuff? Like, where can they find your writing and your podcasts and everything?
Yeah, I mean, you can find Overhated wherever you get podcasts. There's also patreon.com/Scott E. Weinberg, and you'll get probably like 90 plus episodes of Overhated that aren't on the public feed yet and won't be for several months. But they will be eventually. So that's my process for Patreon. Everyone seems to have their own process. And for Patreon patrons only, I'm going to be launching a new podcast soon. I like the phrase sidebar, but it's like going to be relatively finite. And it's going to be called a Horror Passport, where each episode I'm going to have a horror nerd on, and we're going to discuss the best horror films from a specific country.
Oh, that's very cool. Oh,
I accept your invitation.
I want to do something relatively simple to an American audience the first time around, so I might do either Canada or Ireland. But obviously I want to get into like everything from Japan to Argentina to Great Britain and everything in between.
What an amazing idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, listeners, if you like what we do, jump on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening. Drop us a 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined. That will just help us to reach a wider audience and spread the word too. Talk up the show a little bit. If you're posting anything about us on social media, use the hashtag Puppet Masters Castle Freaks. See if we can't get that to catch on a little bit more. You can follow us on Instagram, on Twitter or X if you can get yourself to call it that, which I can't. Blue
Nope.
Sky, Social, Threads, we're in all of those places. Also YouTube with some fun content coming in the near future on that platform. So jump on there. You can find us Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks on YouTube and subscribe to that channel. You can follow me personally at _cowboy_Jerry and Steve at Minotaur Matador. So yeah, thank you guys so much. Oh, I do want to say one thing. If you're listening to the show right now and you live outside of the continental United States, I would love if you would write us an email at puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com and let us know where you're listening from and how you discovered the show and how you found it and where you are, and just a little story about how you came across it, because we noticed that there are a lot of listeners from around the globe, which is really exciting, and we just want to know how the show made it to you. So if you are listening from outside the US, please do that. It would be much appreciated.
Yes,
Steve,
very much so.
what do we have coming up soon?
Next week, we are going to be talking about a movie that I'm not super familiar with, but it looks insane. It's a movie called Shrunken Heads from 1994. It's about a bunch of decapitated teenagers seeking revenge. Can't wait for that one. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
And we will not be talking about that alone. We have a very special guest who will be joining us next week to talk about Shrunken Heads. I don't mind spoiling it here, because by the time this episode drops, we'll probably have posted about it anyway. Steve, who's joining us to talk about Shrunken Heads?
Well, we have acclaimed New York Times best-selling horror author Grady Hendrix, who's the author of books like My Best Friend's Exorcism and The Final Girl Support Group, and his newest book, How to Sell a Haunted House. We're very excited to talk about horror movies with Grady, we're very excited about that.
Yeah. So listeners, you're not going to want to miss next week, but stay tuned, subscribe, drop us a rating and a review, and we will see you next time for Shrunken Heads.